Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Sean coming to you live from Death Church Radio podcast this week. I actually recorded the first part of this episode, which is going to be the second part, last weekend. And it's about a sermon that I listened to that had to do with Dietrich Bonhoeffer that was talked about from a man named Dr. Reggie Williams. I believe he said he was a sociologist, and also a doctor. So for this week's episode, I actually wanted to do a throwback now that I finally have a new Chromebook to use with new programming for me to edit videos. So this is going to be this is actually going to be the first after about a month and a half to 2 months of not being able to do a podcast. Now I'm finally back to doing it. So basically this week has been pretty good. It's been really good up until the very last part. It's actually not been too bad through Monday through Friday. This week I actually worked a lot on my book. For the people out there that don't know, I actually write poetry, and I'm working on my 7th book right now, but possibly the 7th book is already finished because it's going to be a small chat book. But the next book of next year is going to be 400 poems, which is going to be my greatest hits as a poet. So like basically my Leaves of Grass or my, pleasures book, like from Charles Bukowski, like my greatest hits book, or even, Ariel from Sylvia Plath, or even the Psalms. But anyways, so, excuse me. That's what I've been working on this week, and I've been very much focused on it. And also I'm writing out lyrics for the next song that I'm going to be playing here on the channel. It's actually, we do have one that was actually completed and finished, I believe about 2 months ago. So it's already been finished. It's just I need to make the video where I can write out the lyrics for the people to watch on YouTube. It's called Flowers for Regina, which is an ode to my current girlfriend. But, right now I'm not really sure how that's going right now. So, I like to try to be as personal as possible, but not try to reveal too much information about things like this when, I like to keep, a lot of things private, but also talk a lot of different stuff about different things that are somewhat personal on the show. So, it's just because this has been on the forefront of my mind lately. Because, unfortunately, now that cooler heads have prevailed, and that I'm not freaking out anymore, and I'm not getting super, super angry anymore, which actually doesn't really happen that often. It seldom happens where I get mad enough to the point where I'm screaming and yelling. I have not gotten to that point since about 3 months ago, which was the last time I got in an argument that was that heated with my girlfriend again. So it's just a learning experience for me, getting back into what it means to be in a relationship. Definitely how I handled the situation as to why we were arguing was completely inappropriate on my part when looking back at it and reading the messages back on my phone, as we were texting a lot, fighting last night and this morning. But I feel a lot better because I went down to the place to get a massage. I got a 90-minute massage, even though I haven't been there in 4 months. And it was a much, much better experience at the other location as opposed to the one I've been going to. It was like 100 times better, so I'm just going to go to one specific location on Wilmot and Broadway. So, anyways. So, had a really, really bad weekend. So, unfortunately, it just happens sometimes, And the thing is that this has to do with trust and how I've gone back on my word and how it's just... Oh, hold on. Sorry about that. Just turn that off really quick. So, anyways, unfortunately, sometimes you're going to get in fights. And the inconvenient truth, and this is what I was thinking about when getting the massage, because, you have a lot of time to just sit there and think. What I was thinking to myself is the inconvenient truth for me is this is not, it doesn't have to necessarily be normal, but fighting is normal. It just depends on how you argue and how you fight with your woman, with your old lady, girlfriend, your wife. So, how I handled the situation, now looking back on it, was completely illogical and very inappropriate. I just don't exactly know why I freaked out so much. It could have been built up frustration. I wouldn't say it was necessarily the job this week, because normally when I'm really stressed out, keep in mind, I really don't flip my top like that often. I'm usually pretty mellow. It's just, when thinking back on it, I think what happened is when she said, because I'm not going to reveal this information exactly, but what I did had to do with her not being able to trust me and trust that I can lead us in a relationship, because of, she wants me to try to follow Christ the best I can, but also be a man of my word. And that's something that has always been a character flaw and one of my transgressions. It's definitely not a virtue. It is a vice, where I say I'm going to do things and I don't do them. If the situation is somewhat scary or awkward, it's because I'm introverted. So Pastor Sean here is an introvert. So even though I did go by myself to the church last night, and it was, walking in, there was a lot of people there, people I didn't recognize. And to be quite honest, it was pretty awkward, just kind of standing around while everyone's talking to each other and having a good time. It was a bit embarrassing, but I stayed there. I took 2 pens with me. I wrote my Bible. We went over 2 Samuel. We went over 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 19 to all the way to chapter 3. So, and I wrote a bunch of notes in the book too. So it was a little awkward, but I did go up to the guy because I felt that God was putting it on my heart to not go ahead with a new network Bible study that I was going to do on Thursdays, where I was going to go back to what I used to do and prepare like a 4-page sermon with study questions, where we would all have to, have a discussion and stuff, then have a prayer group and, have a prayer session and things like that, like what I used to do. I felt that God laid on my heart, actually, to make the decision. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I'm not sure why, but in mid-August, I've started to get allergies again. So I've been clearing my throat a lot. But anyways, so unfortunately, the thing with not being able to do a Bible study actually has taken some relief off of my shoulders, because it wasn't the fact that I didn't know what to talk about, but for the fact that I was just going to get message after message saying, "Oh, sorry, I couldn't show up," and then I'm sitting at the Starbucks by myself, embarrassed, because this actually has happened before. When I was leading a Bible study, I remember I tried to do a second one. This was back in 2011, and when doing a second one at a different Starbucks, because I wanted to do one, I think, on Saturdays and then one on Wednesdays or Sunday morning. It was something like that. I wanted to do 2 of them a week, to get more souls to Christ kind of thing. Excuse me. So it didn't exactly work like that. I just sat in the Starbucks and just waited by myself, and nobody showed up when I had the sermon prepared and everything. It's just, these are things I just don't like to think about. Anyways, so I went to church, and then I felt it laid on my heart, and I wrote in the Bible that, I felt God was telling me, you should go check out the men's group and go join the men's group. So the guy was right outside when I was walking out of the cafe area, and it said Men of Honor. So I took that, and they have at 6:30 every Thursday, they have their men's groups with a pastor. and discussion groups. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and do this instead, and then just ask people around me if they would like to go with me, instead of me just leading the group. So anyways, it was actually fairly awkward, but I got through it, and I felt a lot better when coming into the parking lot, because the first time I did that a couple months ago with my girlfriend to go to church for the first time in 2-3 years, my heart was racing, and it's just because I had unfortunately, I've had a lot of bad experiences with the American church. I've said this on the show before, but I don't want to really talk about this too much. But anyways, so we, got in a very, very heated argument about the fact that she said she can't trust me. And because I went back on my word, and this is the third time, apparently from what she told me, this is the third time I've done this. And when thinking back on it, it's true, I did do that. So I want to talk a little bit about, on today's podcast, just what's on my heart right now, because of how upsetting this was. The thing is that why I think I got so upset, now looking back on it, it's because I heard my mother, in my head, when my girlfriend was explaining to me as to why I messed up and how she can't trust me anymore. And now we can't. I said I was originally going to move in with her, and I know that you guys know that that's not what the Bible says. You're not supposed to be doing that. You're supposed to wait until marriage. We did give each other promise rings, but that's not good enough. You need to actually get married by a pastor and have two flesh become one flesh. Then it's okay to have sex, because the sex goes from premarital sex, which is unholy, and then it becomes to marital sex, which is holy. So then you can enjoy the body and the flesh of your husband or your wife once, you are both combined in marriage. So, and have kids or don't have kids, or, whatever you like to do. But, so that was one of the reasons, and I felt that she just, with her words, it was just really, really harsh to me in the moment, because of, it's something that I think I still haven't gotten over, even though I've had about 5 therapists in my life. Tried to go see a Christian therapist lately, but that did not work out. That didn't work too well, because the person wasn't there when I went to the person's house for the session, and then they didn't return my calls. But anyways, so this also might have to do with the fact that I never got over, I still haven't gotten over my ex-fiance and how she herself was abusive. She was not physically abusive, she was emotionally. She was, not to say that I was completely right in everything. I have actually blocked a lot of that out of my memory, but she, from what I remember very thoroughly and well, is that she was a very emotionally, verbally abusive person towards me. Her mother, her sister, pretty much her whole family it was very, very dramatic. There was a lot of drama with her and her family because of different reasons. I'll just leave it at that. But so I think that's why that stemmed from that. It's like when I heard her, I heard other women in my head, and that's why I got so offended. And I also got so offended and upset because we were breaking something apart that I thought she was breaking up with me, when she, now looking at it logically, she wasn't doing that. She just wanted me to understand. She just wanted me to understand her and what I did, and how, what Pastor Richards and Sean Richards, the other pastor, was saying on that show that I watch on the weekdays from 5 to 6, the Reason for Hope show, that you can write any question you want into the show. Is that you have to be the spiritual leader if you're the man. If you bow your knee to Christ and you stick the sword in the ground, and you are a man of faith and a man of God, then you need to be held to a higher standard. And I'm actually talking, it's like I'm kind of talking to the mirror right here. And it was my mistake for me to act so immaturely. actually pretty embarrassed now that the smoke has faded and the fire is put out. So now the fire that has succumbed and lowered along with the smoke is now touching the ground, and there's no fog. And now there's not a reason to be angry, just to look at it logically. You know, I made her very upset. I felt that she made me very upset too. It's just, I guess I forgot how to argue, because that's a very important thing in a relationship. You're not supposed, well, in a relationship, you're not supposed to have such high ridiculous standards where the person can't do anything wrong, because then it's just like one of the people that keeps, if you have ultimatums and you keep giving a person ultimatums saying, if you don't do this, I leave, it's like what Jordan Peterson said, the person was a scared cat, afraid to do anything, afraid to say anything, afraid to say how they really feel. We all have sin, so, but not to justify my actions either. So the thing is that this was just a travesty. We are right now in a chasm where there's just a divide between us right now. And it was because I didn't keep my head cool. I think if I would have kept my head cool and said, maybe you should just go to church first and then go to the gym and I'll do the same thing, and then we just come back to it with cooler heads, then the explosion would have not happened of me flipping out. This happens sometimes because with me, Pastor Sean here, it's very, very difficult. I rank high on the agreeable chart. Not really high, but high. I'm open, like my alpha personality trait is openness. That's what I rank in the 5. And then my beta one, the secondary, is neuroticism. So I'm very, very open with the people that I choose to be open with. And the woman that I'm in love with, I felt like that, in a sense, now looking back in it, when I kept saying that she was verbally and emotionally abusive and yelling to get my point across, in succession of doing that, I verbally abused her. Now that I think back on it. And that definitely was not my intention at all. I don't want to hurt her in any way, or like let alone hurt anybody. So that was, I would like to think of myself as a very gentle soul. But I think we both know, or we all know, that that's not true. So, inside, I get really angry really quickly, pretty often. I get annoyed very easily, but I stuff it down inside, because to me it's illogical to act like my father, or act like my mother, or other people around me that can't seem to keep it together, that they just feel they need to be insulting or to roast the other person or your friend or things like that. Just things that are, it's just not healthy, So things ended very badly this morning when we were arguing, and it's not good now. So I pray that it becomes better, and I just, it's just how I am sometimes. I keep it all inside until it explodes, because I don't want to be that guy who is feels like he's constantly complaining about things, constantly freaking out. Because in 2005, just to let you guys know, I'm pretty sure I went over this already, but I have what's called panic disorder. So I feel emotions stronger than a normal person. So when someone is is slightly annoyed, I'm very annoyed, but it's internal. Or when if there's a thing where panic needs to happen, where if you need to run away from something, or something could go wrong, or a dangerous situation, or maybe even you're arguing with someone, I feel these emotions 2, 3, 4, 5 times what the other person feels. I don't know that for sure because it says in the Bible you don't know the other person's heart. Only God knows that information. So, but from the studies that I've done many, many of them over the years on what exactly I have and the type of anxiety disorder I have and things like that. Almost every study I've come across has said the same thing, that me, as opposed to a normal person, feels much, much stronger emotions, like as if I'm bipolar, than a regular person. So, but I pack it down inside, and then I just give it to Jesus. I say, okay, here you go, Jesus, go ahead and take this from me. Because I freak out in my head at least once a day. Like, I freak out a lot. I'm like a nervous, inside I feel like I'm a nervous dog, even though on the outside I project myself as like a German shepherd, you know, where I show my teeth if you mess with me, but I want to be perceived as the good guy and to do the right thing, you know, in society, and to love Christ and walk with Christ. But, you know, I'm a soldier that's willing to help the sick and the weak and pray over people that need help, but I have a sharp sword and you're not going to mess with me. I'm the dog you don't pet, you know. So, but inside, that's not how I feel. I have very little self-confidence and self-worth. So, pretty sure in the Bible says you're not supposed to have those things anyways, but I don't know. Anyways, so back to the point here. There's a way in how to argue in a relationship, and I forgot about these things because I haven't been in a relationship in years until, you know, February of this year, and it's mid-August now. And the woman I'm dating said she never had a boyfriend. She was completely celibate and had just committed herself to the Lord, to Jesus, for 9 years mid or after college. So it's just, you know, it's just, I just feel like I'm filled with guilt for what happened. Like I shouldn't have acted the way that I did, you know, and I'm embarrassed. But anyways, let's just talk about something else before I get to the next post about the sermon I listened to when driving back from Phoenix. So, I got about 6 minutes left until the next part of the podcast. I do really miss doing this. I like to do what like Jim Cornette does when he records his show, and I like to walk around my apartment or put the thing in the cup holder in the car and talk into it when I'm driving around. Like I'm just not one of those people that can sit down and just talk into something. It's like, for me to make videos, I have to keep stopping the video. Like when you guys see that I read books for an hour, you know, for you guys to get an understanding of what book it is, for you guys to buy the book and study it. A lot of the time I press stop to go and walk around. Like I have a lot of energy. I feel like I always have to move. So, not because of caffeine or anything like that. It's just because I feel that, I think it's just my personality. It's what I was born with. But, anyways, oops, I dumped out my coffee. Oh wait, I had chocolate milk. I went to IHOP this morning and it was very, very awkward. I was so ridiculously angry. I was so angry. I had knots on my stomach and I thought I was going to vomit. I was that angry. I hardly slept last night, but I got a 90-minute massage and I'm pretty sure I'm going to sleep sort of well tonight. So anyways, you know, if the woman I'm dating does decide that how I acted was too much and she wants to break up with me, it's going to take a while to get over. It's probably going to take a couple months to get over that, because of how special she is to me and how I feel we have almost everything in common. And she made my birthday 2 weeks ago very, very special for me. And she is just an all-around wonderful, you know, lively human being. And there's just not words that express, you know, how much, you know, I love this woman. I just made a big mistake. But anyways, if that does happen, I bow my knee to Christ and I will stay on the path of the cross the best I can. I can't promise that I'm going to be perfect, but I can try. I can try the best I can. Some things I just succumb to really easily. It's just a part of my vices. Everybody has virtues and vices, you know, except Christ. He didn't have that. He just had the virtues. So anyways, other than that, I've just been working on my book and I've been hanging out. I've been buying a lot of Xbox games lately. I've been into the original Xbox lately. I've been playing a lot of that. One of my probably one of my favorite things to do during the week after work is after I eat dinner, cook dinner, and eat dinner. You know, I like to put the TV on mute and then play a game for like an hour, then call my girlfriend, and then we just talk while we're on speaker. It's one of my favorite things to do. So, I've been playing that, buying games for that because they're really cheap. And there's a possibility that me and my brother are going to start a new hobby where we are going to go to different Goodwills and Salvation Armies around Arizona. And we're going to go purposely looking for blank VHS tapes or VHS tapes that have just like something that someone recorded stuff off TV onto VHS tape and then happen to sell to or donate to a Goodwill. So like it's a new hobby. I don't know if it's new, but it's a hobby my brother found today. So I thought it was really strange and that I was completely into that idea because every time you buy one of those VHS tapes that are unmarked on those stores, you're spending like 50 cents per one. So it's actually like it's a cheap, like fun, interesting hobby to have like on the weekends. So we used to follow, actually, now that I think about it, we used to follow the show called Dead Mall Series. And what we were going to do 2 years ago was me and my brother on the weekends, we're going to go to different places around Arizona and with our phones, like to record like videos of us going around to abandoned like Kmart's and abandoned stores and like abandoned places and malls. Cause I know of one in Phoenix that me and my friend Rob went to about 4 years ago. So just a second, I'm taking a swig of water. So, yeah, that's the, so that's going to be the new hobby that we're doing. I actually do feel pretty relieved about, not having to be a pastor because my job is very difficult and I just kind of want to work on my book, even though I do want to write sermons and whatnot. Thankfully, it's not necessary anymore. I don't have to pack on more stuff that I have to do onto my life. I can just go join a Bible study group, a men's group on Thursdays and just speak my mind on things or teach when I come in there. Like when we have the discussion groups, like what I used to do back when I was in the pastoral training program. I very much liked that. I very much enjoyed that. So now that's actually kind of a weight off my shoulders where I don't, like I said, I don't have to worry about nobody showing up and me just being completely embarrassed, you know. So, anyways, so I got 2 minutes left. So what you're going to be hearing for the last half hour of the show is me driving around going over I actually listened to it twice. The sermon, basically on the Harlem Renaissance, where I felt that the guy teaching was using Dietrich Bonhoeffer, which is a man that I just became acquainted with because of my girlfriend and her friend that she has in the ministry. So, of like this philosopher, this teacher, because I hardly knew who Bonhoeffer was. I still don't really know who he is. But I felt that this guy was using him to justify his mindset in social justice and things like that. It's just nowadays it's a big gray area because it could mean, you know, it's just like, it's not, to me, it's just those things aren't good, but they're not godly. But I do have my opinions after listening to him, and I also listened to the Q&A section after his preaching for an hour on, there was one part, he actually read 2 poems, and one of them was Black Jesus, White Jesus, and how Dietrich Bonhoeffer said that when he came down in 1931, here to the American churches, especially because he went to Harlem in New York, and that he said that the black churches were much more lively and more Christian-y, quote unquote, more full of God in African American churches as opposed to white churches. You know, so it's a bit offensive, but hope you guys enjoy it, and here it is. Hello, guys. This is Pastor Sean, coming to you from Death Church Radio, the Death Church Radio podcast, and also the Sean C. Stookie Show on Facebook. And for this week's video, I wanted to talk about a doctor named Dr. Reggie Williams from a sermon I randomly found on Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Now, let's turn that down a little bit. Now, this sermon I actually found kind of confusing, because what I did when driving back from Phoenix is I wanted to know more information about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the theologian. Being that I just discovered him recently, maybe a couple months ago, from my girlfriend and her friends who are Christian pastors. So I watched this on Dr. Williams' interpretation of the Harlem Renaissance in Harlem, New York during the 30s, 1931 to 1932, that Bonhoeffer basically described from what this doctor is saying about basically where he's talking about racism from back then, but this is a recent sermon. So, about how Dietrich Bonhoeffer said basically that the only true religion, or the remnant's religion, is the one of who gets into the Holy Spirit the most, which he experienced himself in going to quote-unquote black churches. So, there's actually a lot to unpack here, and a lot of this I actually don't understand, or it doesn't make sense with, I would say, half the stuff that this man is saying during the sermon, and even during the Q&A segments after this sermon he did, or more of a speech, talking about that there's a difference between the black Jesus and white Jesus, but he wasn't really saying if this was a philosophical standpoint or what I didn't understand what the point he was making. Like, I don't understand what he was talking about per se, because it wasn't just like he didn't lay it out. He was talking more so for the listener or the viewer to just assume what he meant when he was laying out this foundation of his sermon. So, and then when the person, I don't know who this was, introduced him up onto the pulpit, basically saying this man is a fighter of social justice, here's my interpretation of that. In the 2000s, I don't know when this sermon took place, but it looks modern in the video, and he does have a reference to Gollum from The Lord of the Rings. So if he is referring to the movies, like he was referring to that in the Q&A section, I'm assuming this is, 5-10 years old, even though these books have been around for, quite a while. But anyways, my point being here is that, so when introducing him onto the stage, when they said he was a fighter of social justice, that sounds to me not too good, because of the current 2019 climate that we are in right now. The stuff that is coming, basically the ideologies that are coming from leftists that preach to be SJWs or social justice warriors. I'm not saying that this man is one of those people. I'm just saying that's how they introduced him, along with being a doctor and a theologian when coming on to the pulpit. That looks bad because it means that you have an agenda of, essentially, to me, when someone says they're an SJW, it is a part of the, to me, you can take this with a grain of salt, you can take this whatever opinion you want, but that goes along with, like, Illuminati-esque, MK Ultra-esque brainwashing. So, when someone says that they are a social justice warrior, that's a huge red flag to me, and I try not to do this, but I'm most of the time, I immediately throw out their argument. Whatever it is that they said. It's like when you're watching a debate and one of them just loses it and starts screaming and yelling. That man lost. You don't need to ask any more questions. If you cannot keep it together and the man starts screaming and reviling, it's because he knows deep inside that he's wrong, or she does. So, that's really bad. But it might have not been his fault. It's just how the guy presented him. Next part, when he's talking about that there's a difference between black Jesus and white Jesus, and even the person who asked the first question during the Q&A of that, he's not stating if this is a philosophical standpoint or if he literally means that there are different Jesuses. He did not, expound on that point. So it was confusing to me, because I do understand that, let's say going back to 1930, 1940, and even before that, 1920, with the whole Jim Crow laws and stuff like that, it is understandable to me from the perspective of, especially of Nazis, because that did get brought up, because that's who Dietrich Bonhoeffer was, one of the guys that orchestrated the attempted assassination of Hitler, from what I understand. Keep in mind, I don't really know much about this guy. I just started learning about him. So, and the point of the sermon was based on race and racism towards blacks, which is also another standpoint that makes me a bit nervous. So, nervous in the fact that this guy, Dr. Reggie Williams, has an agenda behind what he's saying. So, I do agree with a lot of the things that he said about the personal accountability, and that you talking about basically acknowledging sins, and that we should things like that. He didn't necessarily say to give God all the glory. It's mostly based on just, I guess you would say, like, taking examples from W.E.D. or W.E.B. Du Bois, about taking these different examples of these two poems that he read, talking about that Jesus was the first one who was lynched, and then it eventually came to black people 2,000 years later. So when people pray, they're praying to a black Jesus and a white Jesus. I understand that he could have that variation of a mindset, because a lot of people that are ignorant do things like that. I don't know if he didn't mean for that to be the point, but I'm just going to go ahead and clarify with the listeners who listen to my podcast that there was one Jesus, and this man was not of white skin, but there is also a big possibility as to where he was born at, that he wasn't African either. This man was most likely olive-skinned, that was possibly dark-skinned Jewish, from around the area of the Gaza Strip, of that, that area of Israel. So that he was either a light-skinned or mid-tone skinned Jewish man, or dark olive skin. So we're worshiping one Jesus, not the variations, because I understand that the Watchtower in Brooklyn, New York, with the Jehovah's Witnesses, preach that Jesus was white. There are many other churches, especially in the West, where I understand it's mainly a thing of the area as to the environment that you're in, because there are statues I've seen of, let's say, a Korean Jesus, or a Japanese or Filipino Jesus, especially one that comes up a lot, at least from my findings, is that there's a black Jesus who died on the cross who had dreads. But, so all of those are incorrect. He was a Jewish man. So, and we're worshiping one person. It's just one Jesus. It's not your version of Jesus. So I don't know exactly what he meant by that. It wasn't exactly explained. Nor was the fact of what exactly did Dietrich Bonhoeffer exactly have to do with the Harlem Renaissance. But also keep in mind, I actually don't know much about that either from the 1930s. I've never studied it, of the Harlem Renaissance. At the time I'm aware of the art movement, but not of I guess the difference is in Christianity, but so I'm just going to give you my perspective on this. In the 2019 climate, it can be dangerous, especially being that this man seems like a more articulate, mature version of that other guy that I watched who debated Stephen Fry and Jordan Peterson, along with the woman who was on his team. I don't remember what that guy's name is. The one that made the point about, basically, in so many words, he was essentially racist towards white people. From what I listened to the entire thing too, so I'm not saying that that's not up for debate if you want to ask me about that in the comments, but that's how it came off to me. Basically, essentially, he just wouldn't answer the question when Jordan Peterson was asking, well, would it make you feel better if whites paid reparation or pay a white tax in order for us to be equal? Which defeats the purpose of Jesus dying on the cross, because now there's no unity in the cross. We all can't be unified because I'm white. It's now okay in the 2019 climate, at least from what it says constantly in the news, all over the place, for me to purposely be treated like a second-class citizen because blacks were all the way up until, what, the 1950s, the 60s? So there's a thing here where you have to, if you're going to go on the pulpit as a doctor or pastor, you got to be really careful about this kind of politics that you're preaching. And it doesn't matter what skin color you are. Because this, as me being a white person, it is not biblical for me to walk around guilty of being white. So, and this is, I'm not saying that this was the point this guy was trying to make, but it kind of came off like that. So, I'm not saying Dr. Williams is a racist. I'm just saying that, because also there is the thing where I do believe that there is a possibility, it could be correct, that Jesse Lee Peterson from the Fallen State show, he teaches that racism doesn't exist, and that it talks about instead that we do not have enemies of flesh and blood, but enemies of the principalities of the invisible kingdom, which talks about in Ephesians chapter 6 verse 10 through 14. So I can understand that. But if you see somebody that you've had no experience with, and that people have told you things, that, let's say I'm looking at a black man in front of me, and white people have told me things, or Hispanics or whoever, to vilify and hate this black person, I look at this black person, I may have a tendency to be racist towards him and to unnecessarily hate him. So I do understand that there can be racism there. So, but here's the thing. I'm going to try to be careful here. So, here's the thing. When you just bring up things of black culture, because this is a black man preaching, Dr. Williams is an African American, or I'm not sure if he's American, but African man preaching these things, how it comes off to me in the new climate of 2019 is that this could be mixed, as in like a rhetoric type of hate speech, even though he's talking about lynchings that were happening in the 1930s and 1920s, even up to the 1940s. So you have to be really careful about that. I'm not saying that he is, though. I don't know. I don't know him personally. I just found this video randomly. I was actually looking up information on Dietrich Bonhoeffer and happened to stumble into that sermon that was basically about race, and he spoke about white supremacy a couple times. That does not bode well nowadays. So that's more so of, there's a possibility that you could accidentally or intently cause strife and cause chaos and cause disunity by talking about things like that in this climate, because of the fact that, it would make complete sense to a lot of people that would just identify themselves as leftist Democrats or just leftist people like
Antifa or whatnot, that if I said that my ancestors, being that I'm not completely fully white, quote unquote, that my ancestors from Switzerland or the Manx were a possibility that they were enslaved at some point in history, that it's okay to ask for reparations or to basically play this pain Olympics kind of thing, this game of pain and of victimhood, saying that you have to see me and treat me as if I'm in this tribalism, like this group identity thing, because my ancestors or my grandfather, great-grandfather and his family were slaves to this person who happened to be of this race. So he could perfectly say the same thing, you know, Pastor Sean, I'm black, and there's a possibility that your white ancestors kept my people slaves, so I'm going to guilt trip you. That doesn't apply because I'm an individual. It's like what Martin Luther King Jr. talked about, to not be judged by the color of the skin, but by the content of the character. And even the content of the character isn't even necessarily Christian itself, if you believe in grace. Especially if you're saved, because Jesus talked about when someone, I forgot who asked him, how many times should someone be saved, and he said, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times, basically translating to an infinite amount of times to always live in this bubble where you're not living in unforgiveness. So that doesn't apply either, because that being a content of the character also doesn't really make sense, because sin is always going to be there. You're always going to have sin until you die and then get the newly created body in the afterlife when you go to the actual life. So, I mean, this is what I'm going to say about this. You have to be really careful if you're going to talk about race politics in church. You got to be real careful about this, because you could accidentally make enemies doing something like speaking these things, even if you've had personal experiences as a black man or as a Hispanic man or Filipino man or Jewish man, whatever, where you experienced racism in your life, or your parents or grandparents were slaves. So even if you had those personal experiences, I've had them too. So it's just when I see something like this, it feels like I'm being personally attacked because of the color of my skin, which in essence is racism. It's still racism. Even if I'm white, it's still racist. So it's just a race. I'm saved, you're saved. We're both under Christ. So that's I guess that's the point of what I'm trying to get at here. I just didn't really understand what the point was of him bringing that up, other than the fact that he said blacks are more Christian-y the whites because they're more louder in church. He didn't expound on that statement. He just said it and then went to the next thing, and then he read another poem. So, he didn't thoroughly explain things. He just said things, and it didn't really have to do that much with Bonhoeffer, just with those statements, which was like 1 or 2 statements. So, to the untrained eye, a lot of people would just blindly walk into a sermon like this, and then we're all supposed to stand up and start cheering because he's black, and because he's a teacher at a university of race and racism, you need to understand these things, but it's just from his perspective on life. It's not like, okay, so here's another thing that I'm sure you've heard in sociology classes and whatnot. You can't just pigeonhole a race into something because one person did something to you that was terrible. For example, if a black man breaks into your house with a ski mask on and steals your stuff, people then associate with all blacks are thieves. That all of them are going to break into your house. All of them are going to rob you. That's not how, that's racist. That's not how that works for someone who is, but I understand, because I did know someone who really thought like that back when I was in high school. A lot of people just assume I see one thing and therefore the whole race is like that. So, but they have to do that with me too. It's only fair. I serve the same Christ. So you can't just assume that I'm going to bow to you because you're another race, or I'm just going to bow down and say, me even not even choosing what skin color I was born with. I just happened to be born white. That was God's decree for my life when I was born, is that I have white skin, even though I'm actually a mutt. I'm not really white. I'm not fully German. I actually have Jewish and French blood in me and Manx blood. So I'm just saying that just because I'm white doesn't mean that I should be talked to differently as if I did these racist things myself. Not saying that I might not have done those things, because you don't know. In the extreme circumstance and situation, like what the Nazis said when a lot of them were on trial, and they said, I was just obeying rules, and then you find out later through those psychological tests of those person thinking he was getting electrocuted, or the person on the other side of the wall they thought was getting electrocuted, because the person would force them to press the button when the answer was not correct after they would ask a question. So, sorry about that. So that's all I'm trying to say here, is that it shouldn't be expected because I'm white and I disagree with something. You can't just pigeonhole me and put me in this box saying that, well, Sean, you need to, Pastor Sean, you need to understand this side of history, and then feel bad about it because people like you lynched black people. That's not how this works anymore. It's actually now going around the other way, to where if, let's say, I'm not a Trump supporter, but Trump supporters, it's getting really ugly and it's getting really nasty in the news. And not saying, because a lot of the people that I watch that happen to be Trump supporters are either Hispanic people on Facebook or YouTube or Instagram. Hispanics and blacks are actually about half of whom I watch who are conservative Republicans. I would identify myself in politics, even though I don't really like to talk about politics on this channel, because I feel like it can be, I don't want someone thinking this is divisive, but I'm independent, or I could be like conservative libertarian, but I'm more conservative independent. So I'm just saying that, I'll just leave it at this. I'll just reiterate what I was saying. You got to be really careful if you're going to preach, especially nowadays, about something like that, because someone like me could take offense to that. So it's okay, you can offend me as long as it's justified. But if you're just going to spout things people that look like me did when I had nothing to do with that, try to get that understanding. It's just like when I was listening to the radio this morning, and it's just now assumed by I'm assuming thousands of people nowadays in America that if you say you're against illegal immigration, that therefore you're a white nationalist or you're a white fascist. That's real ugly speech, because that's not what that means. So that's real ugly. So I'm just saying, keep the unity of Christ, and just, how about instead of making assumptions by the color of their skin, you just get to know that person, and that you guys can have a civil discussion, and even if you have disagreements, to not just assume the person's a racist because of the color of their skin. Again, I'm not saying that this guy was saying that. That's just how I'm interpreting it. So thank you guys once again for listening. This is Pastor Sean from Death Threats Radio Podcast, and God bless.